41-year-old millionaire was completely stunned to see the 18-year-old waitress, who looked exactly like his ex-wife. The restaurant buzzed with soft conversation, the sound of clinking glasses blending seamlessly with the delicate notes of a piano drifting through the air. Crystal chandeliers bathed the room in a warm golden glow, illuminating the tables draped in pristine white linen. Alexander Carter sat at the corner table, his back to the large floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. A storm brewed beyond the glass, faint flashes of lightning flickering against the dark sky. Yet the turmoil outside was nothing compared to the storm inside him. He stirred his bourbon mindlessly, barely listening as his business partner droned on about market strategies and expansion plans. The words blurred together, meaningless. His mind was somewhere else, or perhaps nowhere at all. It had been that way for years. "Sir, may I take your order?" The voice was soft but clear, cutting through the haze like a blade. Alexander blinked and looked up. His hand froze mid-air. The glass slipped from his fingers, catching the edge of the table before it toppled, bourbon splashing onto the white cloth. The world around him seemed to tilt. For a moment he couldn't breathe. Standing before him, holding a small notepad, was a young waitress. And she looked exactly like her. Exactly like Elena. Alexander's chest constricted, his pulse hammering in his ears. The same brown, wavy hair cascading over her shoulders. The same delicate features, the gentle curve of her lips, the slightly upturned nose. But it was the eyes that stole the breath from his lungs. The same deep, expressive hazel. The same eyes that had once looked at him with so much love. The same eyes he had seen close forever. "Sir, are you all right?" Her voice again, gentle, concerned. Alexander realized he was staring. He forced himself to blink, swallowing the tightness in his throat. The restaurant seemed unbearably loud suddenly, the laughter, the clinking glasses, the music. But it was nothing compared to the chaos in his mind. What's your name?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. The young woman hesitated, clearly uncomfortable under his intense gaze. "Sophie. Sophie Evans." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, shifting slightly on her feet. Is everything okay, sir?" "Sophie. Not Elena." "Of course not." But the resemblance was so haunting, so precise, it was as if he were staring at a ghost. Alexander struggled to regain his composure, clenching his jaw as he nodded stiffly. "Yes, fine." She lingered a second longer, then nodded politely. "I'll give you a moment to look over the menu," she said softly, turning to leave. But Alexander wasn't ready to let her go. "Not yet." "Wait." She paused, glancing back. The words tumbled from his lips before he could stop them. "Have we met before?" Sophie frowned, shaking her head gently. "No, sir. I don't think so." His heart sank. Of course she hadn't. Elena had been gone for nearly 2 decades. But it wasn't just the resemblance. It was the way Sophie stood, the quiet grace in her posture, the kindness in her voice. It was too much, too painful. Alexander pushed back his chair abruptly, the legs scraping against the marble floor as he stood. "Excuse me." His business partner blinked in confusion. "Alexander, where are you?" But he wasn't listening. He didn't even care about the stairs as he grabbed his coat and strode toward the exit, the need for air suffocating. The storm outside had worsened. Rain pelted the streets as Alexander stepped onto the sidewalk, the chill soaking through his tailored suit almost instantly. But he barely noticed. He braced his hands on the cold stone railing, heart pounding in his chest as he struggled to steady his breathing. Get a grip. It wasn't her. It couldn't be her. Elena was gone, buried. He had held her hand in the hospital. He had watched the light fade from those eyes. And yet, he could still feel the way Sophie had looked at him. So familiar. So impossibly, painfully familiar. The past had never haunted him so fiercely. And for the first time in years, Alexander felt something. Not numbness, but a crack in the fortress he'd built around his heart. And he wasn't sure if he feared it, or if he needed it. The rain tapped softly against the tall windows of Alexander Carter's penthouse, a rhythmic, relentless sound that mirrored the storm brewing inside him. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass, blurred slightly as his gaze unfocused, lost in a memory he had buried for years. The glass of bourbon sat untouched on the table before him, the same way it had sat untouched at the restaurant earlier that night, after her. Elena. 19 years earlier, the scent of lilies had filled the air, soft music playing in the background. Elena had worn a pale blue dress, her hair cascading in soft waves as they danced under the warm glow of the chandelier. "Promise me," she whispered that night, her voice barely above a breath, "you'll never forget to live, Alexander." He had laughed then, holding her closer. "How could I forget, when you're my whole life?" But promises had a way of breaking. The accident had been sudden. A rainy night, much like this one. A collision. A moment of chaos. And then, the unbearable silence of the hospital room. Elena's delicate hand in his. The beeping machine slowing. Her voice fading with her final words. Let go, live, for both of us. But he hadn't. He had locked himself away instead. The memory cut deeper tonight. Because Sophie had her face. And Alexander needed to know why. The next morning, Alexander sat in the back corner of the same restaurant, his face carefully composed, but inside, tension coiled like a spring. Sophie moved gracefully across the room, balancing a tray, her focus on the guests she served. She hadn't noticed him yet, but he noticed everything. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, just like Elena used to. The way her lips pressed together in quiet concentration as she refilled a guest's glass. It wasn't just resemblance. It was mannerisms, movements. It was too much. When Sophie finally turned and caught his gaze, she hesitated. For a moment, their eyes met. She shifted uncomfortably but offered a polite smile before disappearing into the kitchen. Alexander exhaled sharply. He needed answers. "Mr. Carter, how can I help you?" The restaurant manager stood stiffly by his table a few moments later, clearly uneasy with the millionaire's unexpected return. Alexander cut straight to the point. "The young waitress, Sophie Evans. I need to know more about her." The manager blinked. "Is there a problem, sir?" Alexander shook his head. "No. He struggled to find words that didn't sound insane. "Finally," he said, "she resembles someone I used to know. That's all." The manager hesitated but eventually nodded. "She's been working here for about a year. Polite, hard-working girl. Never late, never causes trouble. Keeps to herself, mostly. I know she's a student, community college, I think. Lives with her younger brother." Alexander's brow furrowed. "Younger brother?" She mentioned her parents. The manager shook his head. "I don't think so. I do know she was adopted when she was very young." Alexander's stomach twisted. Adopted. A cold shiver crawled down his spine. No, it couldn't be. Could it? Bright. The kitchen door swung shut behind her, the clatter of dishes and the hum of conversation fading slightly as Sophie leaned against the wall, pressing a hand to her chest. Her heart was racing. Why had he come back? Why was he staring like that? It wasn't just curiosity. It felt personal. Sophie shook her head, exhaling shakily. She had a long night ahead, and the last thing she needed was distractions. Rent was due. She had textbooks to buy. And Liam, her little brother, was depending on her. Whatever was going on with Alexander Carter, it wasn't her problem. Later that night, Alexander sat in his study, the dim glow of his desk lamp the only source of light. He had gone over the facts a dozen times. Sophie Evans, age 18, adopted as an infant, no known biological relatives. His heart pounded harder as he opened the old file on his desk, the one containing Elena's medical records. Elena Carter. Died at age 22. No pregnancy records. No surviving family. And yet, Sophie existed. There was only one way to find out the truth. Alexander reached for his phone. "Connor, I need you to look into someone. Discreetly." Because deep down, he knew. This couldn't be a coincidence. The city lights blurred as Alexander stared out of his office window, the weight of the private investigator's report heavy in his hands. Rain streaked the glass, the same restless storm brewing inside him as he read through the neatly typed pages again. Sophie Evans. Born March 22, 2005. Adopted May 2005. She had been born just 3 months after Elena's death. The timing wasn't just close, it was too close. And yet, there was no mention of biological parents in the adoption file. No trace of where she'd come from before being placed with her adoptive family. Alexander closed his eyes, pressing his thumb and forefinger to his temples. Could it really be possible? Had Elena hidden something from him before her death? Or worse, had she somehow survived? The questions haunted him. There was only one way to get answers. 3 nights later, At the restaurant. The ambient music hummed softly in the background, but Alexander barely heard it. He sat alone at a corner table, his back straight, fingers clenched around the stem of his wine glass. The air felt heavier tonight. His heart pounded as he watched Sophie moving between tables, laughing gently with the guests she served. For days he had wrestled with his own thoughts. Don't confront her here. Don't make a scene. But he needed to know. And he was running out of patience. Sophie approached his table, her smile polite but hesitant. "Good evening, sir. Can I get you something to start?" Alexander's gaze didn't leave her face. For a moment, words failed him as memories collided, the echo of Elena's laughter, the softness of her voice. "It's not her. Don't lose control." Finally he spoke, his voice quieter than he'd intended. "Sophie, can you sit for a moment?" She blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Sir, I'm working." "Please." Something in his tone made her hesitate. Glancing toward the manager, who nodded cautiously, she slid into the seat opposite him. Her eyes, so painfully familiar, studied him with quiet curiosity. Alexander cleared his throat, struggling to find the right words. I know this is unusual," he began, his voice strained. "But I need to ask you something. About your family." Sophie's brows furrowed. "My family?" He nodded, leaning forward slightly, his voice low. "Were you adopted?" "Adopted." Her breath caught. He said. "How do you?" "I had someone look into your background." His words tumbled out faster now, the weight of his questions pressing too hard to hold back. Her posture stiffened, her expression shifting from confusion to guarded. "Why would you do that?" "I don't even know you." Alexander hesitated, then chose brutal honesty. "Because you look exactly like someone I lost. Someone I loved very deeply." Silence stretched between them, charged and heavy. Sophie swallowed hard, clearly unsettled. "That doesn't explain why you're asking about my adoption. What are you trying to say?" Alexander clenched his fist beneath the table, struggling for control. "I'm saying I believe there might be a connection. Your birthday, it's only a few months after Elena died. And the resemblance." Sophie pushed back her chair abruptly. Her face flushed with confusion and hurt. "Wait. Are you suggesting that I'm related to your ex-wife? What are you even?" "I don't know." His voice broke, raw and vulnerable. "I'm just trying to find the truth." Sophie stood, voice trembling with quiet anger. "I don't know anything about my birth parents. I've never cared. My adoptive parents were all I needed." Alexander nodded slowly, guilt sinking deeper into his chest. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you, but I can't ignore this, Sophie. The resemblance, it's coincidence. I lost Elena, and then you show up, looking exactly like her. Please, just let me help you find answers." Her lips parted as if to speak, but then she shook her head, eyes glistening. "This is too much. I don't need your help, Mr. Carter. I'm not some puzzle you need to solve." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving Alexander alone with the ache in his chest. But as he watched her disappear into the kitchen, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't giving up. The rain lashed against the windows of Alexander's penthouse, matching the storm raging within him. He stood in his dimly lit study, the glass of untouched bourbon sweating on his desk. A photograph lay before him, Elena smiling, radiant, taken just months before the accident. Beside it was the private investigator's file on Sophie. The resemblance was undeniable. But this wasn't just about how she looked. It was the way she spoke, the subtle tilt of her head, the kindness in her eyes. Was he losing his mind? For days he had wrestled with the impossible question. Was this grief warping his perception, or was there truly a connection he had yet to uncover? Yet all he had done was push her away. And it haunted him. Sophie sat cross-legged on the worn couch of her modest apartment, staring blankly at the cup of tea going cold in her hands. The echoes of her conversation with Alexander still rang in her ears. "I'm not some puzzle you need to solve." Why did it feel like he had ripped open a wound she hadn't known existed? All her life she had avoided questioning her adoption. Her parents were kind, loving people. They'd never treated her differently from their biological son. But Alexander's words, the sheer desperation in his voice, it lingered. And for the first time, questions she had buried began clawing their way to the surface. The next day, Alexander couldn't take the silence any longer. He needed to talk to her, to explain. He needed answers. Sophie was wiping down a table when he entered the restaurant. The moment their eyes met, tension snapped tight between them. She straightened, clutching the rag like a shield. "Mr. Carter," she said, voice clipped. "I'm working." "I won't stay long," Alexander replied, voice softer than before. "Please, I need to speak with you." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You said everything already. I'm not interested in being part of your grief." Alexander flinched but nodded. "I know. But I owe you the truth. Please, just 5 minutes. Then I'll leave." Against her better judgment, Sophie exhaled and gestured for him to follow her outside. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained heavy with clouds as they stood near the back alley. The scent of wet pavement lingered in the air. Alexander took a deep breath, his voice rough but honest. Her name was Elena. Sophie's arms folded across her chest, but her gaze softened with curiosity. "My wife," he continued. "We met when we were just kids. She was everything to me. And she died 19 years ago. A car accident." Pain laced his voice, and Sophie felt her own defenses waver. "I've spent years burying it, building walls, until I saw you." Sophie's breath caught, but before she could speak, he added, "I don't think you're her. I know how impossible that sounds, but you have her eyes, her smile, the same kindness she carried. I couldn't ignore it." Silence fell between them, and then Sophie shook her head, her voice cracking. "So you're saying what? That I'm some reincarnation? A ghost you can't let go of?" "No." Alexander's voice sharpened. "That's not what I—" "Then what is this?" Her voice rose, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm not some shadow of your past, Alexander. I'm my own person. And you don't get to make me feel like a replacement just because you can't move on." Her words struck deep, sharp and painful. Alexander felt the breath leave his lungs. "I never said you were. But that's how you look at me," she choked. "Like you're searching for her every time you see my face." She turned away, hugging her arms tightly around herself as if holding herself together. "This, whatever this is, it's not fair," she whispered. Alexander took a step closer, voice softer. "Sophie, I'm sorry. You're right. I've been searching, but not for Elena. For the truth." Her head snapped up. "The truth about what?" He hesitated. "I hired a private investigator," he admitted quietly. "You were born just months after she died. And there's no record of your biological parents." Sophie staggered back, eyes wide with shock. You investigated me?" "I didn't mean to violate your privacy. I needed to understand." Tears spilled over her lashes, her voice breaking. "I'm not your mystery to solve, Alexander. I'm not some piece of your broken heart to fix." He opened his mouth to apologize, to explain, but she shook her head. "Please, just leave me alone." And with that, she turned and walked back into the restaurant, the door swinging shut with finality. Alexander remained frozen in place. For the first time in years, he felt truly lost. The rain had stopped, but the city outside Alexander's penthouse remained draped in a gray haze. The damp air clung to the glass windows, blurring the skyline, just as his thoughts blurred together, regret, guilt, and something deeper. He sat at his desk, the dim glow of his desk lamp illuminating a single yellowed envelope. Elena's handwriting. It had been tucked away in the back of his study drawer, sealed all these years. He hadn't been ready to face it. Until now. "My love, if you're reading this, I hope you've found peace. Or maybe you're still searching. You always tried to fix things, protect me, solve every problem. But some things, Alexander, some things can't be solved. You once told me you couldn't imagine life without me. I need you to prove yourself wrong. Please, don't shut yourself away. Don't let grief become your prison. Promise me, no matter how hard it feels, you'll keep living. Let me go, Alex. With all my love. Elena." The words blurred as his vision clouded. I didn't keep that promise. For 19 years, he had clung to the ghost of her. And now, with Sophie, he had let his unresolved grief twist into obsession. But I won't make the same mistake again. The next morning, Alexander sat in his office, the letter still folded carefully in his pocket. But his focus now was on a different document. His assistant entered, setting a folder before him. "This is the tuition statement for Liam Evans. Fully covered, as requested, sir." Alexander nodded, his voice softer than usual. "Ensure it stays anonymous. I don't want her to know it came from me." A week later, Alexander returned to the same restaurant, but this time he chose a quiet corner table near the back, out of sight. He watched Sophie from a distance, not with longing but with quiet observation. She looked different. Lighter, somehow. As if a weight had lifted, even if just a little. She smiled more. spoke with more ease. It wasn't about him anymore. And that was exactly why he was there. Not to fix her, not to force answers, but simply to let go. Later that evening, Sophie clutched the letter from her brother's school in trembling hands, her heart pounding as she reread it for the third time. Tuition paid in full. But how? Tears welled in her eyes. She hadn't told anyone about the financial struggles. Only one person could have known. Her hands shook as she set down the paper. And without thinking, she grabbed her coat and headed straight for him. At the Alexander's penthouse, the sharp knock on his door was unexpected. Alexander opened it, and there she stood, rain-damp, eyes blazing, clutching the crumpled letter in her hand. "Did you do this?" Sophie's voice trembled, holding up the tuition notice. He met her gaze, silent for a beat before nodding. "Yes." Her lips parted, confusion battling frustration. "Why? Why would you?" "I wasn't trying to control you, Sophie." His voice was calm, steady, but layered with emotion. I wanted to help." Her arms crossed tightly over her chest, still guarded. "You can't just throw money at people's problems, Alexander. That doesn't make everything right." "I know." He exhaled softly, his voice breaking just slightly. "I've spent so long trying to fix things with money because it's easier than facing what I can't change. I couldn't save Elena. I can't rewrite the past. But I can make sure you don't struggle the way I did after losing her." Silence stretched between them. Sophie swallowed hard, the anger in her eyes dimming just slightly. "That's not your responsibility." He nodded. "I know. But I care about you. And I care about your brother. This isn't about debt or guilt, Sophie. It's about wanting you to have the life you deserve." Her breath hitched, her defenses finally cracking. He wasn't trying to control her. He wasn't trying to replace her family. He was just trying. She wiped at her eyes, voice softening. "Thank you. For caring." Alexander nodded slowly, the tension in his chest easing for the first time in weeks. A spark of trust had ignited. And this time, it wasn't built on grief. It was real. Several weeks later, the city sparkled beneath a canopy of stars, the skyline reflecting off the glass windows of the elegant gala venue. Inside, the sound of soft piano music drifted through the air, mingling with the quiet hum of conversation as guests moved gracefully between candlelit tables, adorned with white roses and gold accents. Alexander stood near the grand staircase, adjusting the cufflinks of his tailored black suit. Tonight wasn't about business. It was about closure, and about her. In the weeks since his last conversation with Sophie, Alexander had taken a step back, not out of indifference but out of respect. He had begun attending grief counseling, finally confronting the pain he had buried for nearly 2 decades. The ache of losing Elena hadn't disappeared, but it no longer consumed him. For the first time, he could breathe. And during that healing process, a final truth had surfaced. Elena hadn't hidden a secret child from him. Sophie was not Elena's daughter, but she was connected to her in an equally profound way. Elena had a twin sister, a twin who had chosen surrogacy to help a close family friend conceive. Sophie had been born from that surrogacy, but tragedy struck when her birth mother passed away due to complications during childbirth, leading to her adoption as an infant. She wasn't Elena, but she was, in a way, a part of Elena's story, a part Alexander had never known. The evening had been carefully planned, every detail meticulously chosen, not for vanity, but for her. The gala tonight was a fundraiser for young women pursuing education, a cause Alexander felt deeply inspired to support after learning Sophie's story. And at the heart of it all was Sophie herself. When she arrived, Alexander felt his breath catch. She stood at the entrance, wearing a soft emerald dress that brought out the warmth in her hazel eyes. Her hair, usually pulled back in a simple ponytail, cascaded in soft waves over her shoulders. For a moment, he simply watched, his heart aching with something deeper than grief. Hope. Redemption. She spotted him then, their eyes locking across the room. A nervous smile touched her lips. And in that instant, he knew he had made the right decision. The lights dimmed, and the gentle clink of glasses faded as Alexander stepped onto the stage, microphone in hand. He wasn't nervous. Not tonight. He spoke not as a businessman, but as a man who had finally found clarity. Good evening, everyone. Tonight is not just a celebration, it's a tribute. For years, I believed strength was measured by success, by wealth, by accomplishments. But I was wrong. Real strength is found in those who rise despite life's hardships. It's found in resilience, in quiet acts of courage that often go unnoticed. There's someone here tonight who has shown me exactly what true strength looks like. Someone who, despite facing challenges most of us could never imagine, chose compassion, chose hope. And tonight, I want to honor her. The crowd murmured softly as Alexander's gaze drifted towards Sophie. She pressed a hand to her chest, visibly emotional. "Sophie Evans," he continued, voice steady, "you have taught me that strength isn't about power, it's about grace, about finding light even in the darkest moments. And tonight, this event is dedicated not just to you, but to the spirit of every young woman striving for a better future. Thank you for showing me what it means to live again." Applause erupted. But Alexander wasn't watching the crowd. He was watching her. The gala had begun to wind down, the music softer now as guests mingled in smaller groups. But Alexander only saw Sophie as she approached, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "That was," she paused, swallowing hard, "beautiful." He nodded, voice gentler now. "You deserve it, Sophie." A silence lingered, full of everything unspoken between them. Then, finally, she whispered, "I know about the tuition, and the gala, and everything you've done for me and Liam." Alexander tensed, ready for her rejection. But instead, she reached for his hand. "I was wrong before," she admitted softly. "I thought you were trying to control my life. But now I see you weren't trying to fix me. You were just showing up." He exhaled, relief washing over him. "I never wanted to replace anyone. I just cared. And I didn't know how to show it without getting it wrong." Sophie smiled through her tears. "You didn't get it wrong. Not this time." And then, slowly, she stepped closer, letting down the final wall. Later that night, the city sparkled beneath them as they stood on the rooftop terrace, the soft breeze tangling strands of her hair. Alexander gazed at her, his hand intertwined with hers. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," he admitted quietly. She rested her head gently against his shoulder. "Neither did I." And in that moment, it wasn't about Elena. It wasn't about grief. It was about them, moving forward, together. And so Alexander and Sophie's story reminds us that healing is possible, that love can bloom even after the deepest heartbreak, and that sometimes the most unexpected connections are the ones that change us forever. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and share it with someone who needs a little hope today. And for more inspiring stories of love, redemption, and emotional healing, make sure to subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay inspired and keep believing in the power of love.